Now we're going to look at the Smart Sharpen filter. And before we do, I think it's important to mention that the numbers that you use in any of these filters is going to vary depending on the size of your image. And so these are just guidelines for you. They're not absolute rules for every single image. And the most important variable that you're going to find is your image resolution. So small pixels, really large resolution images require more sharpening than large pixels. So an image that's been cropped or resized. And so just be sure that you experiment with the image and choose settings that look best based on the individual image and resolution. Now we're going to look at the Smart Sharpen filter. And this filter gives you a lot more options than the Unsharp mask filter does. Let's first select an image, and we're going to select this architecture JPEG. So of course the first thing that we're going to do is duplicate our background layer. Now we're going to go to Filter, and we're going to select Sharpen and Smart Sharpen. Now one thing that is nice about the Smart Sharpen window is that it's resizable. We can go in and we can make adjustments. When yours opens, it may look like this if the shadows and highlights drop down hasn't been clicked, but you can resize this window to give yourself a better view of what's happening. And so I usually make it fairly large. Give me the best viewing options. Now these sliders, amount and radius, are the same as what we saw in Unsharp mask. The main difference is what's happening in the background here. It's a lot more mathematical algorithms occurring to give a smarter sharpening effect than what we had in Unsharp mask. And then down here we have the reduce noise slider. And this slider allows you to lessen any noise that might be happening within your image, either in the highlights or the shadows. Now, default on this is usually 10%, but it does go up to 100. Under Remove, you can select Gaussian blur, lens blur, or motion blur. 99% of the time, you're going to have this on lens blur. Now, Gaussian blur is what Unsharp mask uses, and motion blur is what happens in your image if someone was moving, etc. You could go in and you could try to fix it using motion blur. It doesn't really always work very well. So select lens blur and then click the arrow out beside shadows and highlights to open up the shadows and highlights sliders. And what these allow you to do is you can go in and adjust sharpening within the shadow and highlights. So the first slider is fade amount, and this allows you to reduce the sharpening that Photoshop applies to your image's shadows or highlights. And that depends on, if you're up here, it's going to adjust the shadows. Down here, it's going to adjust the highlights. So let's say we're doing 175 or 195% sharpening up here in our amount slider, but maybe we don't want that much sharpening happening in our shadows. So I can reduce my shadows sharpening down to about 25%, and I'm not going to get as much sharpening in my shadows. But say I want to make sure all of my highlights are sharpened, and so then I would come in and I could adjust my highlights accordingly. If I want them 100% affected, then I would leave my fade amount at 0. Tonal width allows you to control exactly which shadows and highlights Photoshop is sharpening. And so generally the default is set at 50%, meaning that the shadows and highlights get sharpened evenly throughout their tonal range. If you enter a lower number, then Photoshop will only sharpen the lightest highlights or the darkest shadows depending on which one of the sliders you're working on. And then if you put this up at 100%, Photoshop will sharpen all of the shadows and highlights. I prefer to leave that at 50%. And radius allows you to control how many pixels Photoshop is analyzing in order for it to figure out which pixel is in a shadow or a highlight. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And let's take a look at our image for a moment. Now I'm going to turn off preview, and here's what our image looks like when we opened it. Turn preview back on. I'm going to bump this amount to about 150%. To about 150%. Now radius, you can see as I go through and reduce this, I'm going to set it at about 2 pixels. Again, we're dealing with a building, a lot of architectural details, and so you'll see as I click preview on and off, it's making quite a significant difference on the building. Or if I click and hold down on the building here, we can see a fairly large amount of changes occurring in our highlights and shadows. Alright, so now we'll click OK, and we see it applying the filter. And so now I can turn that on and off and see, let me zoom in. As I turn the filter on and off, we can see the sharpening effect on the building. I'm going to cancel out of that, and we'll go to Bridge and open the Java image. And you're going to apply a Smart Sharpen filter to the Java image. Be sure to duplicate your background layer, and then you're going to go to Filter, come down to Sharpen, select Smart Sharpen, and you need to apply an amount of 174% with a radius of 1.6 and reduce the noise by 23%. Then in your shadows, you need to apply a fade amount of 37% with a tonal width of 5 and a radius of 2 pixels to the shadows, and a fade amount of 46% with a tonal width of 7 and a radius of 2 to the highlights. And when you're through with that, you're going to click OK. Then you'll go in and you'll save this as 11C, your last name, _ java.psd. Make sure it's in your Chapter 11 folder, and then you'll close this out.